The moment my heart stopped beating at 37,000 feet, I wasn't thinking about the passengers behind me or the emergency protocols I'd memorized. I was thinking about my daughter's last words to me. "Dad, you never have time for what really matters." Those words had cut deeper than any turbulence I'd ever flown through, and now, as my vision faded in the cockpit of Flight 447, they echoed with a terrible finality. "My name is Captain David Morrison, and for 23 years I believed I was living the dream." Military pilot turned commercial airline captain, flying the world's most advanced aircraft across continents. I had the respect of my crew, the admiration of my peers, and a salary that afforded my family every comfort. What I didn't have was time. Time for my wife Sarah's concerns about our growing distance, time for my teenage son Michael's basketball games, time for my 8-year-old Emma's bedtime stories. I was always preparing for the next flight, studying weather patterns or catching up on required training. My life was scheduled, efficient, and utterly empty of the things that truly mattered. The heart attack hit without warning during our approach to Denver International. One moment I was coordinating with air traffic control. The next I was clutching my chest as lightning-sharp pain shot down my left arm. My co-pilot Jennifer immediately took control as I collapsed, but I could hear her panicked radio calls growing distant as darkness closed in around me. Then suddenly, I wasn't in the cockpit anymore. I found myself standing in a place that defied every law of physics I understood. It wasn't quite light, wasn't quite space, and it was as if I stood within pure possibility itself. The fear and pain had vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace that seemed to emanate from my very core. And there, walking toward me with a presence that made every fibre of my being recognize him instantly, was Jesus. He didn't look like the paintings in Sunday school or the statues in churches. His appearance seemed to shift and change, sometimes the humble carpenter, sometimes radiating such divine glory that I could barely comprehend it, yet always unmistakably him. His eyes held depths of compassion I'd never imagined possible, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of eternity and the gentleness of a loving father. "David," he said, and hearing my name spoken with such love brought tears I didn't know I could still shed. "You have been faithful in your service to others' safety, but you have forgotten to tend to your own soul and the souls entrusted to your care at home." Before I could respond, the space around us began to shift, and I found myself witnessing something that would forever change how I understood God's plan for humanity. Jesus gestured, and suddenly we were observing the earth from a perspective beyond physical sight. I could see not just the planet, but the spiritual currents that flowed around and through it, the prayers rising like incense, the battles between light and darkness, playing out in dimensions I'd never imagined. "I want to show you 4 events that will unfold in your earthly year 2025, Jesus said, his voice filled with both sorrow and hope. "These are not punishments, David, but opportunities for humanity to remember what truly matters before it is too late." The first vision materialized before us like watching history unfold in fast forward. I saw great cities around the world, New York, London, Tokyo, Sydney, and suddenly, without warning, massive blackouts began cascading across continents. Not just power grids failing, but something deeper. I could see that the very technology humanity had become dependent upon was being stripped away. Cell towers went dark, satellites fell silent, and the internet that connected the world simply ceased to function. But this wasn't the work of hackers or solar flares. I could see spiritual beings, angels following divine commands, systematically removing humanity's technological crutches. The chaos was immediate and overwhelming. People wandered streets lit only by candles and fires, unable to contact loved ones, unable to access the digital lives they'd built everything around. I watched panic spread like wildfire as grocery stores emptied, gas stations couldn't process payments, and hospitals struggled to function without their computerized systems. "Why?" I whispered, witnessing the suffering of millions. Jesus' expression was infinitely sad yet purposeful. "Look deeper, David. See what happens when the noise is removed." As I watched, something beautiful began to emerge from the chaos. Neighbours who hadn't spoken in years were knocking on each other's doors, checking on the elderly, sharing resources. Churches that had been half empty were suddenly filled with people seeking not just answers, but community. Families gathered around dinner tables without the glow of screens, actually talking to each other for the first time in years. I saw my own family, Sarah, Michael, and Emma, sitting together by candlelight, and Emma was asking her mother, "When is Daddy coming home? I want to tell him about my day." "The darkness will last 40 days, Jesus explained. 40 days for humanity to remember that connection with each other and with me is more vital than any connection to machines. Those who learn this lesson will find joy even in the simplicity. Those who resist will only grow more desperate." The scene shifted, and I found myself witnessing the second event. This time I saw the Earth's weather patterns, but they were unlike anything I'd experienced as a pilot. Hurricanes formed and dissipated within hours. Earthquakes struck regions that had been stable for millennia. Rivers changed course overnight, and mountains seemed to shift like sand dunes. But again, I could see this wasn't random destruction. Each weather event, each geological shift was precisely orchestrated to drive people from their isolated lifestyles toward each other. Suburbs were flooded, forcing residents into community centres. Mountain roads were blocked, stranding vacationers who had to rely on strangers for survival. Coastal areas were battered by storms that seemed to specifically target the mansions of the wealthy while leaving modest homes untouched. I watched as a massive hurricane approached the Florida coast, but this storm moved with purpose, its eye seeming to deliberately avoid a small church where dozens of people had gathered to pray for protection. Meanwhile, a gleaming resort just miles away was completely devastated. The message was unmistakable. Material wealth offered no refuge from divine intervention. "The earth itself cries out for healing," Jesus said. "For too long, humanity has treated creation as something to exploit rather than to steward. These events will remind people that they are part of something greater than themselves." I saw families who had lost everything finding unexpected joy in refugee camps where sharing became the norm. I watched billionaires who had never known what learning to find meaning through serving others. Communities that had been divided by politics and prejudice were working together to rebuild, discovering that their common humanity was far more important than their differences. The third vision was the most challenging to witness. I saw a plague sweeping across the earth, not a disease of the body, but something far more profound. It was as if a spiritual blindness was lifting from humanity, and people could suddenly see the true nature of their choices and their hearts. Those who had lived lives of selfishness, greed, and hatred found themselves unable to hide behind pretense anymore. Their true motivations became visible not just to others, but to themselves. I watched politicians who had built careers on lies finding themselves compulsively speaking truth. I saw business leaders who had exploited workers suddenly overcome with genuine remorse, using their wealth to make amends. Religious leaders who had preached prosperity while living in luxury were moved to give away their possessions and serve the poorest among their congregations. But the transformation wasn't limited to public figures. I saw ordinary people, including myself, facing the reality of how they had prioritized career success over relationships, material comfort over spiritual growth, personal convenience over service to others. It was painful to witness, but I could see that this revelation was an act of mercy, offering people the chance to change before it was truly too late. "This is the plague of truth," Jesus explained. "For many, it will be devastating to see themselves as they really are. But for those who respond with humility and repentance, it will be the beginning of the life they were always meant to live." I saw my own life played out in this cosmic revelation. The missed dinners, the broken promises to spend more time with family, the way I had used my career as an excuse to avoid the harder work of building relationships. The pain of recognition was almost unbearable. But Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder, and his touch brought not condemnation, but hope. "You see, David, even now you can choose differently. This vision is not just prophecy, it is invitation." The fourth and final event was the most mysterious. I saw points of light beginning to appear around the globe. Not electrical lights, but something far more profound. These lights seemed to emanate from people, but not just anyone. They came from individuals who had responded to the previous three events with faith rather than fear, with service rather than selfishness, with hope rather than despair. As I watched, these lights began to connect with each other, forming networks that transcended national boundaries, language barriers, and cultural differences. A grandmother in rural Kenya found herself spiritually connected to a businessman in downtown Chicago who had given up his corporate job to feed the homeless. A teenager in Sao Paulo who was caring for orphaned children discovered he could somehow sense the prayers of an elderly priest in rural Ireland. These connections weren't just emotional, they were transformative. Where these networks of light touched, healing began to flow. Not just physical healing, though. I witnessed miraculous recoveries from diseases and injuries. More importantly, I saw healing of relationships, of communities, of the very fabric of society. Families torn apart by years of misunderstanding found themselves reconciled in moments of supernatural grace. Racial tensions that had simmered for generations dissolved as people recognized the divine image in each other's faces. International conflicts ended not through political negotiations, but through leaders who found themselves unable to harbor hatred when faced with their enemy's humanity. "This is the promise, David," Jesus said, and his voice now carried such joy that I felt it in every cell of my being. These 4 events, the darkness of technology, the shaking of the earth, the plague of truth, and the network of light, they are birth pangs. Humanity is being prepared for a new way of living, a way of connection and community and love that reflects my kingdom. I found myself overwhelmed by the beauty of what I was seeing. These weren't disasters, they were interventions of grace designed to guide humanity back to its intended purpose. Each challenge was perfectly calibrated to strip away the illusions that kept people isolated and afraid, revealing the joy that came from genuine connection with God and with each other. But what about free will, I asked? What about those who refuse to learn? Jesus' expression grew solemn. Every person will be given the opportunity to choose. The events will be unmistakable signs, impossible to ignore or explain away through human reasoning. But I will never force anyone to love me or to love their neighbors. Those who persist in choosing darkness and selfishness will find themselves increasingly isolated, not because I abandon them, but because they will be unable to participate in the networks of light that are forming. He showed me glimpses of this reality, individuals and groups who responded to each crisis with increased anger, blaming others for their circumstances, becoming more entrenched in hatred and self-centeredness. They weren't punished in some dramatic fashion, but they found themselves cut off from the joy and community that others were experiencing. Their isolation was self-imposed, but no less tragic for being chosen. "This breaks my heart," Jesus said, and I could see tears in his eyes. But love that is forced is not love at all. I have given humanity every opportunity to learn through gentler means, but the hour has grown late. These events of 2025 are my final invitation before the end of this age. As the visions faded, I found myself alone with Jesus in that space beyond space, and he turned his full attention to me. The weight of his love was almost unbearable, not because it was harsh, but because it was so complete, so accepting of who I was while simultaneously calling me to become more than I had ever imagined possible. "David, you must choose now. I can send you back to your body. Your co-pilot has managed an emergency landing, and the medical team is working to revive you. But if you return, you must return changed. Will you commit to being one of the lights that connects and heals, starting with your own family?" The choice seemed obvious, but I found myself hesitating. Returning to my old life, even transformed, meant facing the reality of how much damage my absence had done to my relationships with Sarah, Michael, and Emma. It meant acknowledging years of prioritizing work over family, success over significance. "I'm afraid," I admitted. "What if it's too late? What if they can't forgive me?" Jesus smiled, and in that smile I saw infinite compassion. "David, forgiveness is never about deserving it. It's about receiving it as a gift and then learning to give it to others. Your family needs you. Not the successful pilot, but the husband and father who has learned what truly matters." He showed me one more vision, my family as it could become. Sarah and I sitting on our porch in our 70s, surrounded by grandchildren, telling stories of how God had brought us back together. Michael, grown and married, calling me not out of obligation, but because he genuinely treasured our relationship. Emma, successful in her own right, but never too busy to spend time with her parents because she had learned from watching us rebuild our priorities. "This is possible," Jesus said, "but it begins with your choice right now." Without hesitation, I said, "I choose to return. I choose to live differently." The space around us began to fade, and I felt myself being drawn back toward my physical body. But before the vision ended completely, Jesus spoke one final time. Remember, David, the events I have shown you are coming to pass in 2025. When they begin, help others to see them not as disasters, but as invitations. Be a voice of hope in the midst of fear, and know that I am always with you, especially when the path becomes difficult. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air on a hospital bed in Denver, surrounded by concerned medical staff and my co-pilot Jennifer, who had tears streaming down her face. But what struck me most was the presence of my family. Sarah, Michael, and Emma had flown to Denver the moment they heard about my heart attack, and they were all there, holding my hands and praying. That was 18 months ago, and I can honestly say that my life has been completely transformed. I took early retirement from the airline, a decision that shocked my colleagues but brought immense relief to my family. Sarah and I renewed our wedding vows on our 20th anniversary, but this time we meant every word in a way we hadn't the first time around. Michael and I have season tickets to the local baseball team, and we never miss a game. Emma and I have a standing date every Saturday morning for pancakes and whatever story she wants to tell me about her week. But the changes go far beyond my immediate family. I've become involved in our local church's outreach programs, using my experience as a pilot to help coordinate disaster relief efforts around the world. Sarah and I opened our home to host a weekly Bible study focused on strengthening marriages and families. We've discovered that when you prioritize relationships over achievements, success takes on an entirely different meaning. I've also become something of an unexpected prophet in our community, though I never sought that role. When I share the vision Jesus gave me about the events coming in 2025, I'm careful to emphasize that the purpose is not to frighten people, but to prepare them. These events, the technological darkness, the Earth's upheaval, the plague of truth, and the network of light, are opportunities for humanity to rediscover what truly matters before it's eternally too late. Some people dismiss my experience as the hallucinations of an oxygen-deprived brain. I understand their skepticism, and I don't argue with it. But I've noticed that even the skeptics are affected by the changes in my life when they see the genuine joy in my relationship with Sarah. The pride in Michael's eyes when he talks about his father, or the way Emma runs to hug me every day after school. They begin to ask questions about what really matters in their own lives. The truth is, we don't have to wait for 2025 to begin living differently. Every day offers us the choice between isolation and connection, between serving ourselves and serving others, between living for earthly success and living for eternal significance. The events Jesus showed me are coming, but the transformation he offers is available right now to anyone willing to receive it. As I write this, I can feel the spiritual atmosphere changing around the world. The signs are subtle, but unmistakable to those who are watching with spiritual eyes. Political systems that seemed permanent are becoming increasingly unstable. Weather patterns are growing more erratic and unpredictable. Technology that once seemed infallible is experiencing unprecedented failures and glitches. Most significantly, people everywhere are beginning to feel a strange restlessness, a sense that the old ways of living are no longer sustainable. But I'm not afraid of what's coming. The Jesus I met in that divine encounter is not a God of wrath and punishment, but a Father who loves his children too much to let them continue on paths that lead to ultimate emptiness and separation. The events of 2025 will be difficult, but they are acts of grace designed to wake humanity up before it's too late. My advice to anyone reading this story is simple. Don't wait for crisis to force you to reassess your priorities. Look at your relationships right now with your spouse, your children, your parents, your friends, your community. Are you truly present with the people who matter most to you, or are you always rushing toward the next appointment, the next achievement, the next distraction? If you're like I was, always telling yourself that you'll make time for relationships after you finish this project, close this deal, reach this goal, let me save you years of regret that someday never comes unless you make it today. The people who love you don't need your success. They need your presence. They don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be genuine. Jesus taught that the greatest commandments are to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Everything else, career success, financial security, social status, even personal fulfillment, is secondary to these fundamental relationships. When we get the order right, everything else finds its proper place. When we get it wrong, no amount of external success can fill the emptiness in our souls. The network of light that Jesus showed me is already beginning to form, connecting people who have chosen to prioritize love over achievement, service over selfishness, eternal significance over temporal success. You don't have to wait for miraculous signs to be part of this network. You can join it today by simply choosing to love the people in your life more intentionally, more sacrificially, more authentically than you did yesterday. When the events of 2025 begin to unfold, and I believe they will happen exactly as Jesus showed me, those who have already learned to find their security in relationships rather than in systems will be the ones who thrive. They will be the lights that shine in the darkness, the healers who bring hope in the midst of chaos, the bridges that connect isolated people back into community. The choice is before each of us every single day. Will we live for ourselves or for others? Will we trust in our own strength and wisdom, or will we acknowledge our dependence on God and our need for authentic community? Will we wait for crisis to force us to change, or will we choose transformation while we still have time? I know what I've chosen, and it has made all the difference. My heart attack at 37,000 feet was the worst thing, and the best thing that ever happened to me. It cost me my career, but gave me my family. It ended my old life, but began a new one filled with purpose and joy I never knew was possible. The invitation is open to everyone. The events of 2025 are coming, but the love of Jesus is available right now. Don't wait for dramatic signs and wonders to begin living the life you were meant to live. Start today, with the person sitting next to you, with the family member you've been meaning to call, with the neighbor you've never taken time to know. Start building the connections that will sustain you, not just through earthly crises, but for eternity. Because in the end, when everything else falls away, love is the only thing that remains. And love, I learned in that divine encounter, is not just a feeling or a choice. It's a person, and his name is Jesus. He's waiting to transform your life just as completely as he transformed mine, if you're willing to let him show you what truly matters. Thank you for staying with us to the very end. Your presence here shows that this message has touched you deeply. Now we ask you to take a few simple yet powerful actions. Share your location in the comments so we can pray for your country, subscribe and turn on notifications to receive our daily insights, and share this video with at least 3 people you care about. A single share can be the light that guides someone back to God. And for you, we have a special time-sensitive gift, a free ebook created to help you draw closer to God, find inner peace, and protect you from the rising darkness. This is a limited opportunity. Don't wait. Claim your copy now and take the first step toward God's eternal light.